Let's talk about 2 Timothy. And we're talking here now about one of the last epistles from Paul. It certainly is the last of the pastoral epistles. It's probably somewhere around AD 67. It's right at the end. And as best we can understand the details, Paul is probably writing from Rome. He's in prison, and he's aware that his death is coming soon. In fact, that his death is any time now. So how would this probably work out if he's writing to his disciple, his long-term disciple Timothy, and he's writing him with the awareness of his death coming soon? How would he speak then? And what kind of emphases would he give? You would expect that it's kind of the framework of a last will and testament. Here are my last words. Here are the final things I can give. Here's my final charge. What will I say if I only have a few things or a few opportunities to speak? What are the critical emphases I want to make? And you can sense the flavor throughout here as Paul says things like, I'm coming to the end of my race. I have finished out the stewardship that was given to me. Now I'm coming to the end, and I'm going to charge you. And as we read 2 Timothy, several emphases stand out. A number of them that are parallel to 1 Timothy and Titus. Some, for instance, the preciousness of the truth, the concept of being aware or turning away from vain teachings and false doctrine, the idea that we do ministry through example, that you show how the truth has transformed your life, and then you speak to others about how their lives can be transformed. But there is a very strong emphasis in 2 Timothy that stands out and is distinct to the book. And that is an emphasis on two kinds of ministry. Or I would call them two paths of ministry, two characteristics and directions that ministry can go. And let me show you what that looks like first graphically, and then I'll show you what that looks like within the context of 2 Timothy as we see it in the book. So I would express it this way: two kinds of ministry, two paths of ministry, and I actually formed the arrows with names. I'll explain that idea in just a little bit, but I want you to notice the patterns within them. On the left-hand side, you see the concept of patience in suffering, ministry that rests on the foundation of truth. And so how do you carry out this kind of ministry? Proclaim the truth, proclaim it faithfully and clearly and consistently. Proclaim truth. And the result of that will be not an easy path. It's going to result in suffering. It's going to require your patience, but the truth is worth it. Here's a path of ministry that leads to difficulty, honestly, but it's worth it because it's founded on the truth. On the other side, here, you can build ministry or you can carry out ministry on the foundation of vain speculation, false teaching, or just empty teaching, just essentially non-teaching. And that vain or that empty kind of ministry is going to lead in a direction that has it as its goal or its end point self-focus. Other things that we could put in here are the discussions about ministers who do their work or live out their ministry basically for their own benefit or even for money, horrifyingly. It's ministry that leads, or the name of ministry that leads off into just serving oneself, and that's connected to vain speculation. One idea that I would put in here, this is quite related to what we saw over here. Healthy doctrine leads to right living, unhealthy doctrine leads to wrong living. That's true for the congregants, that's true for the people that you give the doctrine to, that's also true for the people themselves or the ministers themselves. So that if I'm coming back here, I'm recognizing that it's not just random and it's not insignificant. There's a link between truth and patience. True ministry. There's also a link between self-focused ministry and vain speculation. These go together. That if you build your life on empty doctrine, this is what you get. If you build your life on true doctrine, you'll get this, but this is precious. The true kind of ministry is worth sacrificing for. Now, all of that is meant to highlight one other detail, and it's actually the main detail graphically. I just want you to notice all the names. So let's look at the left side first, the positive side. And you can see significantly Timothy. But others, Tychicus, Crescens, Onesiphorus, Eubulus, Titus, Mark, okay, many names in here. And even general, like all the brothers or faithful men. Even ancient examples like Moses. So you're stretching back into history and you're remembering from the past. And there are both male and female names in here, Claudia and Aquila and Lois. So there are names that came from the past, male and female, general, but then quite a few names of specifically people in a pastoral or leadership type of ministry. And it's the recognition that you have almost like a Hebrews 11 idea, a cloud of witnesses. There are many, there are individuals, more than that. These are particular specific people, not just an idea, but these are humans with lives and faces and personalities. And people that are willing to be patient in suffering for the sake of the truth. You can go to the other side, and if you look at the vain speculation side, Hymenaeus, Philetus, Demas, I mean, these are names that you, in many cases, recognize. Names of people who, let's say in the case of Demas, forsake Paul because he loved this present world. And even to go beyond that, I mean, I included the devil appears here. From ancient history, Jannes and Jambres, okay, and that's in comparison to Moses. Moses was faithful, Jannes and Jambres opposed Moses. General categories, evil people and impostors and opponents, and the all who deserted me, all who are in Asia, the many people around him that deserted him. And that is to recognize there's a pattern here too, of many people, real people with lives and names and faces and identities and biographies. These are people that were false to the truth. And they did that for deeper reasons, because at their heart or in their priorities, they turned away. They had something else that they loved. Just to show you what that looks like as you read through the book, I would encourage you, read through the book maybe with two highlighters and highlight in one color all the positives, the names, the individuals that are commended, and then highlight in another color all the negatives, the names and the individuals who have turned away. But we can see those examples specifically. I'm going to show you the negative, and we'll see this, you know, that all who are in Asia turned away from me, such as Phygellus and Hermogenes. The word of such people will eat like a cancer, Hymenaeus and Philetus. I mean, he gives specific references. It's not just in a generalized way. But, okay, here are people you know, Timothy, that are like this because they're denying the resurrection. The foundation of God stands sure. The Lord knows those who are his. But there are other sorts who creep into houses and lead captive silly women laden with sins, led away with diverse lusts. You have an implication here, I think, of immorality, but also taking advantage of people, taking advantage of their simplicity, and taking advantage of their desire for sin. In a sense, verse 7, they're ever learning, but they never come to actual truth. And he's going to recall historic example, a historical example, Jannes and Jambres, who are opposing Moses. But pointing to the results or the implications, what happens, their folly will be obvious to everybody eventually. Eventually, you see the outcome of this. This is going to continue into the future, 2 Timothy 3. Evil men and seducers will wax worse and worse. Demas has forsaken me. Crescens has departed, and Titus to Dalmatia. These two examples, I don't think these are negative. It's just that they've left. They've gone to carry out ministry, most likely. But certainly in the case of Demas, it's actually a forsaking. And finally, Paul will stretch this out into the distant future. The time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own desires, they will heap to themselves teachers having itching ears. They will turn away their ears from the truth. They will turn unto fables. And two comments here. This follows the pattern I've talked about. False teaching is not necessarily always a denial of core doctrines, though we saw that earlier, denying the resurrection. But it can just be turning away your ears, turning to irrelevant things instead. You can lose the truth or lose the faith just by, I don't know, absorbing all your time into controversies on Facebook instead of paying attention to the clear words of God. This is a way that it can be expressed. But notice also this pattern. The time will come, and he's looking now in a future direction. They will not endure healthy doctrine, According to their desires, they will heap up to themselves teachers having itching ears. Just to explain, the having itching ears refers to the people, the listeners, not the teachers. It's the teachers, or excuse me, the listeners who go about looking for teachers who will tell them what they want. And the itching ears idea, or the concept here, is that people won't want to hear truth. Truth is too laborious, it's too exhausting, and more significantly, it holds you accountable. It's too demanding. And so people would prefer, rather, according to their desires, to go out and find a teacher who kind of tickles their ears or scratches something that they want to hear, that gives them a sense of, oh, satisfaction. I finished it. Wow, that was nice. And I think that the concept for this is something we can see around us, just in the world around us. People will turn away from God's truth specifically because it says things they don't want to hear. In its place, they will go out and find a message that suits them, that kind of fits their desires, something they like. And in the process, yes, absolutely, they can find a teacher somewhere. You can always find a teacher somewhere who will give you what you want. It's always possible to get someone who says it the way you like. That's horrifying in terms of ministry, in terms of theology, and in terms of reality, because it is the fact that I need as a human to be corrected and directed and taught, not just affirmed in whatever I already liked. And part of the horror of culture, part of the horror of our broken hearts, is that we just want the same things we're already thinking. We don't want to change. And part of the beauty of the gospel is that it confronts us. There are times when you encounter things in Scripture you don't like. Those might be, not necessarily, but often, they are the very points where you most need to be corrected. And Scripture speaks to us in ways that we're not comfortable with, but those may be the very ways where our hearts have gone wrong. What's the solution to this? Two things. Number one, part of the solution is that we, all of us believers, and certainly any pastor or any leader, has to be desperate, absolutely desperate to pursue truth at all costs, to be faithful to it, and to do that, as we've seen elsewhere in the pastorals, starting with himself. You and I, every believer, has to recognize that I can slip, I can fall away, I can be distracted by irrelevant teaching, and I must first and foremost pursue daily faithfulness to truth, personal appropriation, personal living of the truth, personal obedience to the commands of Scripture, personal self-sacrifice, or just to summarize it all, sanctification. And to show you one passage among many that does this in 2 Timothy, here's an emphasis. The foundation of God stands sure, having this seal, where you see all of the confusion, people going this way and that way, the two arrows and false teaching and people falling away. You can be tempted to wonder, well, is there anybody? Or how would I know? Maybe people that you trusted or loved, and then they fall away. What happened? God knows. There is a clear seal, and that's the sense of absolutely and authoritatively establishing something. This is genuine, like when you open a new product and it says, do not eat if seal is broken. Well, the seal of God stands sure. It authenticates. God knows. And furthermore, here's another way of sealing it. Here's another authenticating seal. Do not accept this product if seal is broken. Here's another way you can be sure. Let everyone that names the name of Christ depart from iniquity. Where you find teaching and teachers that open the door for, just a little pinch, just a small amount, just a small percentage of room for, well, everyone's human. Where you see the open door for sin, you know something's gone wrong. Everyone that names the name of Christ depart from iniquity. Now he's going to contrast. Remember my two arrows, the two ways of ministry, totally opposite, completely different directions. Here it is, verse 20. In a great house there are not only vessels of gold and of silver, also wood and earth, some to honor, some to dishonor. There are different kinds of people, and very different. If a man therefore purge himself from these, he shall be a vessel unto honor, sanctified, holy, meet, ready for the master's use, prepared unto every good work. And you're supposed to read this and say, please, Lord, let this be me. Let me be faithful like this. How would that happen? Flee youthful lusts. Follow righteousness, faith, charity, peace with them that call on the Lord out of a pure heart. It's again that personal sanctification, both in the sense of fleeing some things, following some things, both positive and negative, both components of that. Turn away from some things, turn towards some things, and do it with desperation. Because this is a serious question, the question of our personal sanctification and where that leads. I talked in an earlier section with 1 Timothy about the two categories of commands. And I just encouraged you could read through 1 Timothy and highlight every command in the book. You can do that in 2 Timothy also. And it's helpful to see the type of things that Paul commands across the book. What should a pastor do? You're going to find the same pattern that we saw in 1 Timothy. I said, you see commands about the pastor's personal walk. How does the pastor himself live out his faith? And so starting with yourself, be faithful. And then the other side of it was the pastor's proclamation. So you live out the truth. You also proclaim the truth both together. Live it, do it, and proclaim it. Well, you're going to see that same pattern here in 2 Timothy. I've already shown you some of the passages that talk about the living or the doing. Let me show you now a passage that talks about the proclaiming. 2 Timothy 4, the Spirit says expressly, people will depart from the faith. They'll give heed to wrong doctrine of devils it's even called. And they'll even speak lies in that framework. They'll have their conscience seared with a hot iron. They will continue to abstain from all of these things. And this is the kind of false teaching that is going to happen in the framework of 1 Timothy in these latter days. Okay, now let me show you a pattern to that, or a further expression of that in 2 Timothy. And it's a very parallel passage pointing again to the future and pointing again to the need that we have to proclaim the truth faithfully in the light of that. 2 Timothy 4. I charge thee therefore before God and the Lord Jesus Christ, who will judge the quick and the dead, the living and the dead, at his appearing in his kingdom. This is an eschatological context. Preach the word, be instant, in season, ready, prepared, when it's a convenient time, when it's an inconvenient time. Reprove, rebuke, exhort with all long suffering and doctrine. So speak the word, speak it with doctrine, speak it with patience. Because verse 3, just like we saw a moment ago, the time will come when they will not endure sound, healthy doctrine. After their own lusts, they will heap to themselves teachers having itching ears. They will turn away from the truth. And that's this concept. How do we respond? Preach, proclaim, speak truth. But if I continue down in this passage, the final emphasis that we'll talk about for 2 Timothy also appears here. And that is the emphasis on the transfer of the truth. The concept that my ministry, your ministry, our ministry has to stretch beyond here is what I do in the present, but even seeking to transfer the ministry to the next generation, to the people who will come after. And let's see what that looks like. Paul says, I am now ready to be offered. The time of my departure is at hand. I have fought a good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept up the faith. I've kept the faith. There is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me at that day, not to me only, but unto all them also that love his appearing. He's looking back on his own life. He's recalling his own faithfulness by God's grace. And now he's charging Timothy in the light of his own faithfulness. Timothy, you take this, you extend this, you continue this. And I want to conclude out by noticing that pattern, the pattern of multi-generational faithfulness, the pattern of one generation handing off that baton to the next generation. Paul looking back on his life, by God's grace I have been faithful. Timothy, you go. Let's see that pattern developed across the entire book. So 1 Timothy 1, when I call to remembrance the feigned faith that is in you, it dwelt first in your grandmother, then in your mother. I'm persuaded that it is in you also. You literally have 3 generations. This was transferred. Verse 6, I put you in remembrance of the gift of God which was given you by the putting on of my hands. Paul himself, investing in Timothy, the ordination process, handing that across. Chapter 3, continue in the things which you have learned and have been assured of, knowing from whom you have learned them. And even the passage we just read a moment ago, the concept of preaching the word in order to hand it off to people in the future, the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine. But in the light of that, preach the word faithfully and consistently. Actually, though, the clearest passage of all appears in chapter 2, and I would like to end with this. The things that you have heard of me among many witnesses, the same commit thou to faithful men, who will be able to teach others also. Can you count how many generations or how many steps or levels there are in that explanation? And if you work that out, what you see is Paul talking about his ministry among many witnesses. So it's not just Paul, but it's him together with others. By witnesses, I would link this into the book of Acts and even into Luke. Jesus' ministry, those who were eyewitnesses of what happened, the apostles and others. So you have heard this from me, Paul says, and from many others, Peter and the other apostles and others that were there and saw these things. All of those people handing off the gospel to Timothy. Okay, so there's step 1, Paul, step 2, Timothy. Those things commit thou to faithful men. Timothy is going to invest in others. So step 3, discipling, pouring into others. Who will be able to teach others also? That's really a step 4. And what we have here, amazingly, 1, 2, 3, 4, Paul, Timothy, the people Timothy will disciple, they will go on to disciple people in the future. And it's the recognition that ministry, faithful and effective ministry, is multiplicative. It multiplies. It's multi-generational. It stretches across. And every individual person then, as they minister, has a responsibility. Yes, remember what you received. Remember, as he says, the gift that was given you and how it was given to you. Remember the faithfulness of those that came before. Now you be faithful, but invest in people in such a way that this is not about yourself, but there's ministry that stretches out in the future. Realize that your time on earth is short. Realize that your best investment will be to pour into people that follow you. And for those people then, specifically ministers, to stretch out into the future and to be faithful and to have a vision as you teach them, to help them be prepared to teach others also, so that you would have a multiplying effect stretching out across generations. Look at ministry not just about yourself and your time and your own ministries, but the work of God stretching far out into the future. And recognize that you have a responsibility as a steward that stretches beyond your own time. And I would encourage us then, as we think about ministry, view our own lives as a short little window. It's a race to be run. It's a baton to be handed off. It's a short space of time where you have the opportunity to be faithful or to fall short. In your time, be faithful. In the small span God has given you, do your part. Fulfill the ministry he has given you. Fulfill that stewardship. Part of fulfilling that is to look beyond and to recognize those who come after you and influence them and prepare them and set the stage for what is to come. Realize that the next step, though it might be hard to think this way, but that the next step to come, you've got to prepare them so that they're ready to run their race with faithfulness to the honor of our God. Continue out that race with the vision. We all pray and hope that we can say, like Paul, I have finished the course. I have run the race. I finished what God gave me to do. I wasn't perfect. I sinned. I failed. But I don't have regrets. Because I pursued ministry based on the truth that leads sometimes, yes, to patient suffering and not an easy road, not a path that's bringing the praise of men. But by God's grace, I was faithful to him. And I can rejoice in knowing that he is pleased. That's the vision of ministry that Paul was able to have and that he concluded his life with. And that's what he sets before us as a charge. May we be faithful to that end. May those words be true of us as we continue and as we eventually finish our ministry.